So today we're going to talk about soils, the basics. We're going to go through soil texture, soil structure, organic matter, and how they all relate to each other and being a healthy soil. So soil components, soil is a combination of sand, silt, and clay. Sand is actually the largest particle you'll find that's related to soil. It ranges anywhere from 0.0625 millimeters up to 2 millimeters. If you find anything larger than 2 millimeters, it's actually just called gravel. Basically, it's a rock. It's very hard to compact. You know, you head to the beach, go to a sand pit and grab a handful of sand, crunch it down, and it still basically falls apart if it's dry. It has very few flat surfaces, as you can see in this picture. It's usually pretty angular, but also with some curved edges because it's pretty hard and will break itself apart. It has a very low cation exchange capacity. Cation exchange capacity is the ability for a soil particle to retain nutrients, whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, hydrogen, basically any part that the, can anyone hear me? Is that an old one? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, maybe that was before I realized I had the whole thing on mute. All right, we're good. It's probably an older message. Anyway, cation exchange capacity, cations are, you know, your fertilizers and other plant needed nutrients. So that's what we're talking about when we mention cation exchange capacity. It turns out that all soil particles, whether it's sand, silt, or clay, carry a negative charge, and also that the nutrients that your plants need carry a positive charge. So it works out well that the soil can hold on to the nutrients until the roots can absorb them. Also, sand has a very low water holding capacity because it also has a very low cation exchange capacity. It doesn't hold very well. You can, you know, pour a glass of water into sand and it drains down to the bottom pretty quickly. The next smaller particle is silt. Silt is anywhere from 0.02 millimeters up to 0.0625 millimeters. It's a pretty flat particle. It's easily compacted. You can see a finger here covered in a bunch of slightly damp silt. It's very silky to the touch. It moves around pretty easily. It's very unstable by itself. Again, it's a smaller particle, which actually gives it more surface area than sand. And so that also gives it a better cation exchange capacity. And it's pretty good at holding water. And then finally is clay. Clay is the smallest. It goes all the way down to 0.02 of a millimeter up to 0.02 of a millimeter. Anything that you find out there smaller than the 0.002 millimeters is actually colloidal. It doesn't even count when you're talking about soil texture because it doesn't actually settle out in water. The way a traditional soil test works when you're trying to figure out your texture is you take a very large clear tube, put a measured amount of your soil in there, then fill it with water, dump it upside down, and you time it to see when particles settle out. So sand settles out first. So you wait about 30 minutes and you see how much is settled out. And then another 30 minutes later, that next layer that develops is going to be your silt. And finally, 30 minutes after that, you're looking at your clay particles. And then you measure out the total and figure out your volumes. And that's how you determine what percentages each of your sand, silt, and clay are. Anything that's still floating in the water is considered colloidal and doesn't actually affect your soil texture at all. So again, clay, it's extremely flat, an extremely small piece of soil particle. It's very flat. It has a very high surface area because of that. It has the highest cation exchange capacity. You'll find the most number of negative charges per piece on a piece of clay, and has a very high water holding capacity because it is flat and can basically seal off an area. But for those of you that live in areas that have a high clay content in your soil, you'll know that once it's wet, it stays wet for a really long time, but once it dries out, it's really hard to re-wet. It actually just basically, all the water basically just runs right off. So here we have the soil texture triangle. It's how you take your percentages, which are on each axis, and measured to percent clay, silt, and sand. Once you've done your tube test, then you can determine what type of soil texture you have. Soil texture is completely different from soil structure. People get those confused a lot, but they are two different things when you're talking about soil. So the soil triangle, you're looking at, how much percent sand you have versus percent clay and percent silt. You notice that if you have 50% clay, your soil is just going to be called a clay soil, basically because the clay particles are so small that if you have 50%, it's a massive domination of the clay particle in there, and no matter how much sand or silt you have in there, the silt or the clay is just going to dominate your soil and take over. So you're going to have a very thick, a very high water holding capacity. A lot of nutrients can be held in there, but then again, it's going to be very compacted and have a lot of different issues. So most times you're always going to have a mixture of these, and there's no perfect blend. But most of the time when you're going to put a new plant in, you're looking to want to have some kind of either a loamy sand or a sandy loam. Something that's got the word loam in it is going to be good. So loam's not an actual type of soil; it's a variation on your soil texture. It's a way to determine soil texture, or it's a part of soil texture. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold after the holidays, like most people. And like I said, there's no perfect blend, and different plants thrive under different ones. Obviously, if you're looking at a cactus, that does really well in very dry soils, very high clay. Palm trees do very well in sandy soils. Grasses do very well in sandy soils. And then other plants actually do like the clay. They like the thickness because other plants can't handle it. They thrive there because they're the only ones that can. So here we have a graph of how texture can affect soil behavior. On the left is a list of characteristics like looseness, airspace, drainage, and then across the top, sand, silt, and clay. So you can see sand is really good when it comes to needing a loose, non-compact soil, needing a lot of airspace. If you need drainage, it's very poor when you're trying to form clods. Clods are, aggregates. They're clumps of soil because sand doesn't stick very well together because it's not very flat. It's easy to work with because one, it doesn't stick to itself. It's loose. It has a lot of airspace, plenty of places for you to get your rakes in between. But it also does not have a lot of moisture holding ability or fertility capability or your cation exchange capacity. Silt kind of runs right down the middle. It's fair when it comes to looseness. Again, it is still flat, so it can settle itself in, kind of lock itself together like a puzzle piece. It's fair to good with airspace and drainage. It's fair when forming clods because it is still kind of sticky, but it's still silky enough where it'll slide apart so you can actually kind of shear it off. It's fairly easy to work with. It has a decent amount of moisture holding ability, and because it has more cation exchange capacity than sand, it's better at holding your nutrients. And then clay is basically the opposite of your sand. It's going to have very poor looseness, airspace, drainage, because soil is very flat, or clay is very flat, very small, so it can clump up really well and harden together. It's great at forming those clods, those aggregates. It's kind of like the glue of the soil particles. It's very tough to work with. If anyone's ever tried raking around clay, it's kind of more just like folding over giant chunks of particle board. It has a great water holding capability, and it's much better than sand and silt when it comes to fertility and holding on to nutrients. Sometimes it actually holds on too well, and your plants have a hard time actually getting the nutrients off the clay and absorbing them. So finally, one part that doesn't actually play into soil texture itself, but is still very important to a healthy soil, is organic matter. And whether it's organic matter is just your decomposing plant life, whether it's wood, leaves, grass clippings, flowers, fruits and vegetables, things out of your compost pile, things, walking around the woods, finding all those rotted branches that are falling down, breaking apart, decomposing leaves, things that you can go around and, basically put in your garden that you'd make with your compost pile. Heck, even, eggshells and some types of cardboard are fine are considered organic matter because they will decompose. So moving on to soil structure, which is plays a bit more to do with actually maintaining a soil and growing plant life. Soil structure are how aggregates are arranged. So aggregates, again, are clumps of soil, not just the individual soil particles. They're groups together. So, each of these is a group of sand, silt, and clay at whatever their ratios are, nice and squeezed together, sticking together. Structure is constantly being adjusted by both humans and Mother Nature and animals. Anything out there is actually still working on adjusting structure. Structure can be adjusted by wetting and drying patterns. A heavy rain is going to flocculate the soil, make it spread out a little bit. The water is going to move your particles around. Clay can get carried, silt can get carried, sand will somewhat get carried. So it's going to adjust your soil texture, your specific area soil texture by moving around, and then once it dries, you have new percentages of your sand, silt, and clay. Freeze and thaw cycles, especially in the northern part of the country, freeze and thaw cycles help flocculate soil, creates very large pore spaces, so large that, again, your silt and your clay can move around, while your sand will kind of hold steady, but all that stuff's going to move around with a freeze-thaw cycle, and it's also going to flocculate your soil because the water getting in, freezing, expanding, and then when it thaws and the water moves around, it's going to pull some of that silt and clay with it. Microbial activity on organic matter is going to be a huge adjustment in your structure because the microbes, as they move around, as well as the rest of the microorganisms out there move around, they're going to shift and create new pocket spaces, new large macro pore spaces in your soil. So they, moving around, they'll create, kind of like going out and aerifying. But they'll do it on their own. Same thing as if you're just going out with a rake and turning over, or with a hoe and turning over your garden. Something that people do, especially lawn care providers, turf managers, they go out and aerify. I've seen a number of tree people do it with things like an air spade, where they go out and they actually have the machine actually breaks up the soil structure to create a little bit more macro pore space in there and allow water, nutrients, and air to get into the soil to help out those microorganisms. And then also root growth. Just root growth in general is going to move around your soil, adjust its sand, silt, and clay ratios, and make it healthy and keep it growing. And then as the roots die back, that's adding organic matter into your soil. So same with soil animals, so like moles and voles. Any kind of burrowing creature does the same thing as a root. They just don't leave behind the woody organic matter. And then sometimes they'll even the soil will even absorb cations. So they'll gather, they'll dissolve into the water, create the water to expand, and that pushes your soil around too. So importance of good soil structure. Structure is ultimately what affects your water holding ability, your nutrient holding ability, your root development, and your microorganism activity. Nope. So water holding, you're looking at your structure with those aggregates, macropore spaces versus micropore spaces. Macropore is going to be a great place for your water and your air to sit, allow your roots to absorb nutrients. Nutrient holding, if you have a very clayey soil and it gets compacted, that's going to make it really hard for the roots to actually absorb the nutrients from there. So even though you're holding a lot of nutrients, you're holding them so hard that the roots can't actually get them. And that's going to also affect your root development because it's going to be really hard for a root to push through a very compacted clay soil. You know, picture you trying to drive a shovel in there just by slamming it down. You're going to have it breaks off. It doesn't, your shovel doesn't penetrate very well. Same thing with the root. Where if you're trying to dig through sand, your shovel goes right in. Same thing with a root. It's actually, the sand's easy to move around. And so the root can move it around and grow without any kind of inhibiting factors. And then with your microorganism activity, again, has a lot to do with compaction. That compaction will stop and make it hard for them to move around in the soil. It also makes it hard for them to find any more organic matter for them to eat and turn into plant available nutrients. So again, soils, the more compact they are, the tougher they are. So that's where your soil structure comes into play, as well as your soil texture. So soil should actually be a mixture of all those soil particles, whether it's sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. So soil needs to be able to hold moisture, but not for too long. For that, if you're looking at, a boggy area, that water it's going to hold there, it's going to start rotting your roots. It's going to suffocate out any type of microorganisms in there. It should also be able to hold nutrients, but not so tightly enough to not leach, but not so tight for the roots to be able to absorb them away. So tight enough to leach is pretty easy. Sand, silt, clay, they all do that very, very well. The more compact your soil is, the more clay, the harder it is for the roots to be able to exude their liquids to dissolve the nutrients and then absorb them back into the root space. And then pore space to not inhibit, pore space is in MacroPore, so I actually spelled that wrong, sorry. Space to not inhibit root growth and allow microbial activity. So again, you're looking for MacroPore space, which over time goes away from through compaction and just typical traffic of whether it's walking or machines or playing or rain, any kind of force that pushes down on the soil is going to reduce your pore space, your MacroPore space. So that's where aerification and flocculating your soils comes into play. So soil profile. The soil has about 6 layers, and the only ones that we're really concerned with are the top 3, maybe the top 4, depending on how far into the soil you have to go. But the very top layer is the O horizon. It's where you're going to find your humus and organic matter. Again, that's where it's comprised of your decomposing plant material, your microorganisms. It's your thatch layer. So thatch is just another term for leaf tissue that's decomposing. It's very shallow. Sometimes it's as shallow as half an inch, can be up to maybe 2 inches. After that, it's going to start really mixing in with the topsoil, which is your A horizon. So that's where the settled out humus is, your living creatures, your inorganic materials, your nutrients. That's the main area for your root zone. And you typically want to try to have 4 to 10 inches of topsoil, depending on what types of plants you're needing. Grasses, their root zone doesn't need to be quite so deep. Trees, much deeper. Their roots go much deeper than a piece of turf. And then also, you can tell that layer because the soil is hopefully pretty dark. A dark soil is nice and healthy. Following that is your E horizon, alluviated. That means it's leaching. So that's primarily going to be made up of sand and silt. Most minerals and your clays have actually leached down through there. So they've gone through that layer and have gone down to the subsoil and parent material and all the way to maybe even all the way down to bedrock. So that's going to be much lighter in color because it's less healthy. It gets less. It contains less nutrients, less minerals. It has a lot less organic matter. And then your B horizon, your subsoil, that's where mostly clay and mineral deposits from leaching. So they kind of build up there and kind of create a hard crust. You're going to find a lot of iron and aluminum oxides because of all that clay. They're going to stick there. And also you're going to find some calcium carbonate. And because of the iron and aluminum deposits, it might actually appear rusty in color. And then so the other 2 layers, the parent material and bedrock, at that point, if you reach that, then you must be mining and you're trying to get to something because at this point you're 5 to 10 feet into the soil. So organic matter, the positive features of organic matter, it increases several benefits of your soil. Humus, which is your stable organic matter, that's going to provide your microorganisms plenty of food to eat and move around so they can keep flocculating your soil and releasing plant available nutrients. It's going to create an aggregate stability. So organic matter like clay is going to work kind of as a cement and help hold your aggregates together. It's also going to work with water filtration. Because of that, it's going to take out some of the bad things that are in your water and let the positive cations move through. And it's also going to help increase your water holding capabilities. So if you have a very sandy clay, if you top dress with compost or organic matter, it's going to help hold more water, and you'll be able to reduce your watering needs. It'll also reduce compaction. It's not very compactable. It's not something that compacts very well, though it is sticky. It's more sticky than squishable. And it also will increase your flocculation ability. So it'll actually reduce clay's ability to stick together. So even though clay works, or even though the organic matter works as a cement and hold things together, it's going to keep the clay from really being a flat particle and forming that really hard crust that it can. Again, because it reduces surface crusting. It's going to increase your cation exchange capacity, and it works as a pH buffer. So most plants tend to like a very slightly acidic soil, mainly somewhere between 5.5 to 7 in your pH range. Some do prefer lower, and it's mainly due to the availability of nutrients because of the pHs. The pH doesn't actually affect the plant so much as the availability of the nutrients in the soil. And so organic matter can help buffer that and keep it from becoming too acidic. Benefits of having microorganisms in your soil. We're looking at it's going to accelerate the decomposition of soil minerals, making your nutrients more plant available. And also, microbial diversity can actually help suppress soil-borne issues, including diseases and pests. Whether it, so a healthy soil has a better ability to fight off creating a disease for your trees or your plants, and also can reduce the ability for pests to develop by basically killing them as they develop. So a quick recap over this last 25 minutes or so. Again, soil is made up of sand, silt, clay, organic matter, and microorganisms. Your soil texture is your ratio of sand to silt to clay. A good mixture is encouraged. Back to that triangle, you want to keep it somewhere with in one of those areas where the word loam is around, preferably a sandy loam or a loamy sand. But in reality, that's something that's pretty hard to get, so you can always amend your soil with top dressing, and that's something we cover next week in the soil management class. And you can always add organic matter. Organic matter is one of the best things you can ever add to your soil because it does so many different, it adds so many different benefits. And so healthy soils are the best to start growing healthy plants. Again, you want to start with a healthy soil. We just went over some reasons, reducing diseases and insects in your soil and pathogens in your soil to creating more plant available nutrients. There's just a lot of good to do with starting with a healthy soil. And so that's the end of it. Again, if anyone has any questions, you feel free to put them in that little chat box, or if you want to actually ask it out loud, you can write that you have a question, and I can tell you how to unmute your phone. Before too many people drop off, I'd just like to remind everyone that I will be hosting the soil management class next week. I believe it's Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for joining us on the first Arborjet Roots to Shoots webinar series. We hope that everyone's finding you guys find it educational and beneficial. And that's what we're trying to be here for, is to be your solutions, not just to create products, but we also want to help you understand how to understand the green industry better. Ronnie, yeah, I can certainly put this as a PDF and email it to you. If you want to just type your email address in, just to make sure that I have it, and I can get this turned into a PDF and sent it over to your guys in the field. Great. Got it. Thanks, Ronnie. Paul, John, no problem. I can get you, I can make this all available. I also recorded this, so this will be going up on the Arborjet website and the Arborjet YouTube account for anyone that wants to watch it again. Max, in regards to CEUs, we weren't able to get any ISA CEUs for that right now. It is something we are working on in the future. All right, Gary, I got you in there too. What I'll end up doing is I'll get the record of everyone that attended today, and I'll send everyone a PDF copy of that just in case someone typed their email address in this chat line and I missed it. So I'll just send it to everybody. And again, the recorded session is going to be posted up on the Arborjet website and on our YouTube account. All right, everyone, thanks for hanging on. It's been great. I'm glad to see that the Roots to Shoot seminars have started off with a good kick. And again, I will create this into a PDF, and I'll send it to everyone that attended today. So thanks for coming, and I hope to see you guys all here next week. And if anyone's still interested, we still have room for the Arborjet Winter Webinar Series. You can find that. There should be an email to everyone out from Arborjet, info@arborjet.com. You can type in Winter Webinar and find it. And we still have room for signing up. It starts on Monday. All right, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day. Anyone that's up here in the Northeast, I hope you're hunkered down, safe and warm, and you have a generator in case you lose power, but I'm going to go out and shovel my driveway again. All right, everyone, have a good one. Bye.